My husband had a secret family, so I became friends with his other wife. The first time I met my husband's other wife, she was wearing the exact same perfume I had bought him for our anniversary, Sandal 33. Smoky, sharp, expensive, and entirely unmistakable. I remember standing there in that little neighborhood coffee shop, staring at her across the linoleum table, my brain flat out refusing to connect the dots. She looked nothing like me. She was younger, softer, with long, heavy amber braids trailing down her spine, a solid gold band catching the midday sun, and a toddler sitting right beside her who had my husband's exact eyes, those downturned, smoky brown eyes that had looked into mine every single night for 8 years and told me I was the only woman he had ever loved. I didn't scream. I didn't cause a scene, and I didn't throw my latte in her face. I simply walked straight over, pulled out the chair opposite her, and asked, "What's your husband's name?" She smiled, a little wary, a little confused. "Daniel." My stomach dropped into a bottomless, freezing pit. Because Daniel was my husband. And that was the precise moment I realized my marriage wasn't a life, it was a carefully orchestrated corporate fraud. Looking back, the red flags had been waving like a circus tent, but Daniel was an Olympic-level gaslighter. I remember the exact evening we met him 12 years ago, back when the air in that cramped, underground jazz bar smelled of stale beer and damp wool, and the bass from the speakers rattled the change in our pockets. We were both nobodies then, struggling, broke, sharing a single plate of fries because we couldn't afford two, and laughing until our ribs ached. Daniel had this incandescent, disarming way about him. He was the kind of man who didn't just walk into a room, he inhabited it, making you feel like the entire universe had narrowed down to just the two of you. Back then, he was pure gold. He remembered every trivial detail, the exact way I liked my coffee, the name of the stray cat I used to feed, the childhood stories I told him only once. When my mother was hospitalized for emergency hip surgery 3 winters ago, Daniel was the one who drove 4 hours through a blinding blizzard, sat in the sterile hospital corridor on a plastic chair for 36 hours straight, and spoon-fed my mother broth when she was too weak to lift a hand. When I caught a brutal, delirious strain of the flu that left me shaking under 3 heavy blankets, he didn't sleep in our bed. He dragged a spare pillow onto the cold, hard tile floor right outside the bathroom door and slept there all night, whispering softly through the wood every time I coughed, terrified I wouldn't be okay. Whenever my married friends sat around wine glasses complaining about their emotionally vacant, cheating husbands who forgot anniversaries and ignored their kids, I would proudly puff out my chest, smile with absolute, unshakable security, and say, "Daniel isn't like that. He's different." Turns out, Daniel wasn't like that. He was much, much worse. He wasn't missing the capacity for deceit, he was simply a virtuoso performer playing 2 entirely different sold-out shows in theaters miles apart. The cracks started appearing about 6 months before that fateful coffee shop meeting. It began with the predictable script of a fading marriage, late nights glowing under the blue light of the office, sudden business dinners that stretched into midnight, unexpected weekend trips out of state for logistics audits. At first, I didn't think much of it. His career required travel, and I refused to become that insecure, toxic wife who checked her husband's phone every 5 minutes like a prison guard. But then, the physical textures of our life together began to fray. He became wildly, frantically protective of his phone. He started taking it into the bathroom with him even to brush his teeth, clutching it like a weapon. He changed his password twice in 1 month. He stopped leaving it casually on the kitchen island where it used to sit charging next to mine. One night, while the rain lashed against the bedroom window, I sleepily reached across the sheets because I wanted to check the time on his glowing screen, and he grabbed my wrist so fast, hard, and violently that I actually gasped out loud. "Why are you touching my phone?" he snapped, his voice sharp enough to draw blood. I blinked in the dark, half laughing, half confused by the sheer panic in his posture. "I just wanted to see the time, Daniel, calm down." He stared at me for a long, heavy, suffocating beat in the shadows, his eyes completely dead before slowly melting back into apologies, pulling me into his chest and stroking my hair. But the seed of doubt had taken root in the dark. A few weeks later, I found a dry cleaning receipt crumpled up deep inside the secret zipper pocket of his winter wool coat. It was from a boutique children's clothing store across town, tucked neatly away from our usual neighborhood. I remember standing in the quiet hallway holding that crisp slip of paper in my palm, staring at the line items: tiny cotton socks, a boy's polo shirt, a school uniform size for a 4-year-old. and printed neatly at the top was a name. Ethan. When I confronted him over dinner, his fork didn't even clatter against the ceramic plate. He didn't blink. "My colleague's son," he said smoothly, leaning across the table to kiss my forehead with warm familiarity. He asked me to pick up a few things while I was running errands near his corporate office. It sounded completely plausible, wrapped in just enough mundane detail to make sense. So, I bought it. That's what betrayal does to you. It doesn't always arrive looking like a villain. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in an explanation so reasonable it makes you feel like a paranoid lunatic for even questioning the man who kissed your forehead every morning. Then came the second phone. I found it purely by a cruel twist of fate. Daniel had left for an early Saturday morning flight to a regional warehouse, or so he claimed, and I was deep cleaning our master bedroom, dragging the heavy oak frame out to vacuum the dust bunnies underneath. My vacuum snagged on something hidden near the baseboard. I reached under blindly to pull it out, and my fingers brushed against a small, vibrating black rectangle wrapped in a rubber band. At first, my mind rationalized it as an old company burner phone he used for late-night international logistics calls. Then, the screen lit up violently in the dark dust under the bed, flashing a notification preview. "Daddy, are you coming to my school art exhibition today?" I froze. My breath caught in my throat, turning to ice in my chest. Daddy. Not Daniel. Not Uncle Dan. Daddy. I sat down hard on the edge of the mattress, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold the cold plastic device. Another message buzzed in, lighting up the dim room. This one was from a woman. "Don't forget you promised Ethan we'd have family dinner tonight. He misses you so much." I didn't need a passcode. He hadn't bothered to lock it because he never, in a million years, expected me to clean beneath the bed frame. I unlocked it and opened the Pandora's box of my entire existence. Hundreds of messages scrolling endlessly. Family photographs. High-resolution videos of holidays, birthday parties with paper hats, doctor visits, and school plays. There were pictures of Daniel holding that exact same little boy, blowing out candles on a Batman cake, sleeping peacefully beside a woman in a bed that looked entirely too familiar. And then, I found the photograph that completely stopped my heart, draining all the air from the room. Daniel standing beside that woman under an arbor of white roses, both of them dressed in immaculate wedding attire, smiling radiantly into the camera. And the caption underneath read, 8 beautiful years with my husband. 8 years. The exact same number of years Daniel and I had been legally married. I checked the metadata date on the photo file. It was our exact wedding anniversary. While I had been sitting alone at our dining table with chilled wine and handmade candles waiting for him to return from a 3-day corporate conference in Chicago, he had been standing at an altar, or celebrating an anniversary, with another wife in a home he had built just 15 miles away. I didn't scream. I didn't break a single glass. I just sat there in the quiet bedroom for an hour, feeling the concrete foundation of my life crack down the middle, turning into dust. I quietly took high-resolution photos of every single document, address, bank log, and chat thread on that phone with my own device, then slid the black phone back under the bed frame exactly where I found it. When Daniel came home that evening, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and roasted garlic, he kissed my forehead and asked with a soft smile, "Miss me?" I looked straight into those familiar, deceptive eyes, smiled back, and said, "Of course, honey." That night, while he slept deeply and heavily beside me, breathing slow and steady, I drove out into the freezing rain to the address I had pulled from his map's history. I parked across the street from a lovely, warmly lit suburban home and waited in the dark. Sure enough, at 7:30 a.m. on a Monday, the front oak door opened. Daniel walked out carrying a sleek leather briefcase, and a little boy came barreling out after him shouting, "Daddy." Daniel scooped him up, kissed his cheek, and then the woman from the photograph stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in a cozy cardigan. He kissed her goodbye, got into his car, and drove off toward my house. I sat in my car in the rain, trembling with a cold, terrifying clarity. I should have driven home and thrown his designer clothes out onto the wet lawn. Instead, I pulled out my phone, found the contact saved under "wife" in his burner phone, and dialed her number. When she answered with a hesitant, questioning "hello," my voice locked up in my throat. I hung up. I waited 30 seconds, staring at the steering wheel, and dialed again. When she picked up, sounding deeply annoyed, I said the words that detonated both our worlds. Does your husband ever talk about his other life? That is how I met Sarah. We sat across from each other in that quiet, corner booth of the coffee shop for nearly 3 hours, laying out our lives like two detectives working the same twisted serial killer case. And that's when we realized something deeply terrifying. Daniel hadn't just cheated, he had written a script and performed it twice, note for note. He told both of us he grew up poor, that his father died young in a factory accident, that he despised dishonesty above all things, that past women had broken his heart, and that he never wanted kids until he met us, even though Sarah already had his son. We weren't two wives, we were two characters trapped inside a psychological experiment run by an artist of deception. Sarah wanted to march over to our house right then and there and rip his life apart with her bare hands. I stopped her, catching her wrist across the sticky table. If we confront him now, I told her, my voice dead calm, he'll lie. He'll cry. He'll make us feel crazy. And he would have. Daniel wasn't just a liar, he was a master at weaponizing empathy. So, we made a silent pact. We went back to our respective homes, acted completely normal, and began the real work, following the money trail. That's when we found the first major underground vault of his lies. Daniel wasn't just splitting his time and attention, he was running a localized Ponzi scheme using our combined finances as his personal ATM. He had convinced me to take out a second mortgage on the historic townhouse I owned before we married, claiming he needed the capital to expand his logistics company into regional markets. At the exact same time, he had convinced Sarah that her suburban home's down payment came from his corporate stock options and bonuses. In reality, my mortgage money had funded Sarah's down payment, and Sarah's high salary as a senior financial accountant was actively paying off the commercial credit lines and high-interest loans I was legally trapped under. He was using one family's credit score to finance the other's lifestyle, pocketing the excess cash for luxury cars and secret weekend getaways. As if that wasn't enough, our deep dive into public property and marriage registries uncovered a third file. Her name was Linda. We tracked her down through an old municipal deed record, expecting an ex-girlfriend, but what we found shook us to our core. Linda wasn't an ex. She was his first wife. When we finally sat down with her at a quiet, fading diner on the outskirts of the city, Linda looked like a ghost who had walked out of a tomb. She told us she and Daniel had gotten a messy divorce 7 years prior, after he suddenly emptied their joint accounts and vanished without a trace. Except, when we pulled the legal court files, Linda dropped her fork, her hands shaking. They were never legally divorced. Daniel had completely forged the court dissolution papers, handed her a fake municipal decree, abandoned her to face bankruptcy alone, and simply walked away to marry Sarah, before moving on to me. Most people reading a story like this online always ask, why didn't you just key his car or post everything on Facebook? Because public tantrums give narcissists what they want, drama, attention, and a narrative where they are the victim of crazy, hysterical women. We didn't want to make noise. We wanted an absolute, irreversible structural collapse. For the next 3 months, Sarah, Linda, and I spent every weekend holed up in a secure, windowless conference room at Sarah's corporate office, acting like a specialized task force. We didn't cry anymore, we strategized with cold precision. Linda reopened her case with a ruthless, high-powered family law firm specializing in asset concealment, filing criminal affidavits for bigamy and identity fraud with the original, undissolved marriage license. Sarah used her deep forensic accounting background to trace every single digital dollar Daniel had moved, compiling an ironclad dossier proving corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and money laundering across multiple business subsidiaries. And I locked down every single real estate asset, freezing every property deed, vehicle title, and investment account tied to my premarital credit lines. We didn't tip our hand. We let him keep smiling in the mornings. 3 months to the day after I met Sarah in that coffee shop, Daniel came home beaming from ear to ear, his cheeks flushed with triumph. He popped an expensive bottle of champagne, poured me a glass, and kissed my shoulder tenderly. I have massive news, babe, he beamed, his eyes bright. I just got the promotion to Vice President of Regional Operations. More money, more authority, and you're going to be so proud of us. I smiled, hugged him tight, and whispered congratulations against his neck, knowing full well that his corporate email access was scheduled to be revoked at 9 a.m. sharp the following morning by legal compliance. We set the trap for a Friday evening. We invited him to a private, high-end dining room at a secluded downtown restaurant, telling him we wanted to celebrate his big promotion together in style. When Daniel walked in, looking sharp in a tailored Italian suit bought with funds we had frozen that very morning, he looked like a king surveying his kingdom. He opened his mouth to speak, and the heavy mahogany doors swung open behind him. Linda walked in first, her face like carved stone. Sarah walked in second, calm and collected. I stood up slowly at the head of the long table, the silver cutlery glinting under the warm chandelier lights. Daniel stopped dead in his tracks. The color drained so fast from his face that his skin turned a sickly, gray-green color, like milk turning sour. He looked from Linda, to Sarah, to me, his jaw slack. He dropped his briefcase with a heavy thud, stumbling backward until the back of his knees hit a velvet chair, and collapsed into it. What is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling instantly. Nobody screamed. Nobody threw a drink. Linda simply slid a thick manila folder across the polished wood right in front of him. "Page 412, Daniel," Linda said coldly, her voice cutting through the quiet room. "That's your signature on the forged bigamy documents from 12 years ago." Sarah slid her own folder forward across the mahogany. "Page 809, Daniel. That's the corporate wire transfer audit showing you embezzled company funds to pay for my roof and your secret car leases." I slid the final folder, the thickest one of all, right against his water glass. "And right here is your termination letter from corporate compliance, your asset freeze injunctions, and the criminal indictment for fraud filed by the state prosecutor 2 hours ago." For a second, there was total, suffocating silence in the room. And then, Daniel did exactly what we knew he would do. The tough, successful corporate climber vanished, and he started sobbing. Big, wet, ugly tears streaming down his face. He threw himself forward, reaching his trembling hands across the table toward me, begging, pleading for mercy. "Please," he choked out, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "You don't understand how complicated things got. I loved you all. I was just trying to fix it. Please, don't do this to me." I pulled my hands back into my lap, watching him thrash like a fish out of water. I leaned down slowly, looking right into his panicked, swollen eyes. "I wasn't your wife, Daniel," I said softly, every word a scalpel. "I was your funding source." Within 48 hours, the system he had cheated for over a decade did what it was designed to do. His bank accounts were completely wiped clean by court order to satisfy legal fees and restitution. His corporate career was publicly incinerated. His properties were seized, his cars were repossessed, and he was facing serious prison time for financial fraud and bigamy. For weeks after, my phone buzzed incessantly with blocked numbers, voicemails of him crying, screaming, threatening, and finally, desperately asking that one pathetic question: "Did you ever love me at all?" I didn't answer any of them. Until finally, after the 100th text, I typed out a single sentence: "Yes, Daniel. I really did love you. But loving you never meant I had to drown in your wreckage." And then I blocked him everywhere, permanently. It's been a year since that night. I live in a modest, sunlit apartment downtown now. It's not luxurious, and it's not the house Daniel promised me, but every single key on that ring belongs to me, and every choice made inside those walls is mine alone. Sarah and I still meet up for brunch every Sunday, laughing over mimosas about the sheer absurdity of the circus we survived. Linda moved across the country to start fresh near her sister, free of the shadow he cast over her youth. 3 women. 1 pathological liar. 12 years of elaborate illusions. And none of us ended up being the victims he planned for us to be. We didn't need revenge in the petty, explosive way people imagine. We didn't need to throw punches or burn his clothes. We simply stepped out of the shadows, turned on the overhead lights, and let the real world crush him under the weight of his own foundation. Turns out, when a man builds his entire existence out of smoke and mirrors, you don't need an army to tear it down. You just have to be brave enough to stop hiding the matches.